firsthand the devastating effects of our lingering drought. For those who weren't there, the view was striking. Jordanelle is literally half empty or half full, depending on your level of optimism. And the shoreline has receded so much that it's a fair hike just to reach the water. And sadly, Jordanelle is one of our reservoirs that is more full than others. Utah's been in drought for 8 of the last 10 years, and as we've talked about before, some recent studies show that this is the worst 20-year drought in the West in the last 1,200 years. Unfortunately, the dismal snowpack is not enough to end it, with snowpack at about 25% below normal for this time of year. Obviously, reservoir storage is what gets us through the dry years and is dependent on snowpack and runoff. But extended drought and last year's hot, dry conditions have really drained our reservoirs. Right now, our statewide reservoir storage is at about 59% of capacity, and there's no doubt that we're going to have a difficult water year ahead. So as a result of that, I'm issuing a drought state of emergency effective today. This emergency order will allow the state to use any and all state resources we need to cope with the drought. This is very similar to what we did last year. The Department of Public Safety, the Department of Natural Resources, and the Department of Agriculture and Food will coordinate aid, assistance, and relief. Last summer, I asked Utahns to pray for rain, which helped, but we're certainly not relying solely on deity to solve our problems. I so appreciate the legislature in this past legislative session. We asked them to help fund our water future, and they responded with a record number of bills designed to conserve and stretch our water supply. These new laws provide new tools that will save water, such as developing a new turf buyback program, funding secondary water metering, promoting drought-tolerant landscapes, allowing the purchase of water rights to help places like the Great Salt Lake, optimizing agriculture use of water, and funding more studies of the Great Salt Lake and watersheds to help help us with a data-driven decision approach, and so much more. The state is also providing a detailed water plan with the next chapter coming out within the next week. And these spring storms are helping. We have an amazing storm that's coming over the next few days. We're very excited about that. All of those will help. Unfortunately, it's not enough to get us out of the drought right now. And so the state of emergency is very important. Once again, we're asking Utahns, we're asking farmers, we're asking businesses, we're asking citizens, institutions across the state to do their part to conserve and reduce water usage as we're heading into the season where we start to water our crops and our lawns. Last year, Utahns did just that, saving billions of gallons, and we can do it again. Now, before I get to questions, I just want to touch on one other issue that is threatening our quality of life, and that is the inflation that we are seeing in the United States and specifically here in Utah. The U.S. Department of Labor reported that Utah and other western states are experiencing the highest inflation rates in the country. The U.S. overall inflation rate is at about 8.5%, and Utah and much of the West is closer to 10%. With record low unemployment and strong job growth, it's undeniable that Utah's economy is booming. In fact, this week, the Rich States, Poor States study ranked Utah as the #1 for the best economic outlook in the nation for the 15th year in a row. But with inflation this high, Utahns are really feeling the pinch, especially at the gas pump. And as of yesterday, gas costs in Utah were about $4.48 per gallon. Now, I've asked our team, as I've mentioned before, we sat down, we've met with the petroleum industry in the state, we've met with legislators, we've put together some ideas, and we are having discussions with legislative leadership, and we anticipate over the next few weeks we will continue those discussions with the legislature as they will have to make decisions on what they are willing to do. We are hopeful that we can find some common ground on and ways to reduce inflation. Sadly, this is mostly being driven at the national and international level, but we're going to try to do everything we can to decrease, to help consumers here in the state of Utah, and we look forward to those ongoing conversations with the legislature. We know that Utahns are working hard. We are very lucky to have such a robust economy. It means more Utahns are employed than ever before. It means that there are higher paying jobs available for Utahns more than ever before. That's the good news, but it certainly doesn't help when you're struggling to make ends meet, and we know there are far too many Utahns that are in that category as well. With that, we're happy to answer questions.
Governor, on the state of emergency for drought, what does this get you that's different from last year?
Yeah, nothing that's different from last year. It's exactly like last year, and that's why I'm actually optimistic because of what happened last year, and honestly, we far surpassed and exceeded our highest expectations last year for what Utahns would be willing to do, and their ability to conserve. There were some eye-popping conservation numbers, and our water managers were all shocked at how well Utahns did last year. So we're hoping for repeat performance this year.
Are you planning any restrictions or any kind of demands from the state on local water districts when it comes to conservation measures?
So just like last year, those will be taken on a district-by-district, case-by-case scenario. Every district has different storage capacity, and they understand the usage and the needs of their districts better than the state does. So some districts will see conservation measures going into place very, very soon. Again, I anticipate in my own water district in Sanpete County and Fairview that we will have restrictions as early as June 1st, based on what we're seeing right now. Now, the good news is, and I do want to say there is some good news. So, we had a rough October, November, December was one of the best Decembers we've ever had. Then January was rough. February was one of the worst Februarys we've ever had. March was warmer than normal, which isn't good. April has been a great month. I mean, this is the type of April we've all hoped for, in that it's cooler, so the snow has stayed in the mountains for the most part, and we've gotten a tremendous amount of rain and in the valleys and snow in the mountains. So that's all very positive, and if these storms will keep lining up and keep coming, that's going to help those early restrictions. But for now, I would anticipate that most water districts will see restrictions fairly soon.
Couldn't that happen without a state of emergency, though? And
sure, yeah.
So the question really is, what does the state of emergency do?
There's a couple things that the state of emergency does. It allows us, as the state government, to give resources and make resources available to those districts. We do have emergency funds that we set aside, that the legislature sets aside. We can use those in extreme cases. So if there are communities that start to struggle with drinking water, for example, we can tap those emergency resources to help those communities in ways that are necessary. Again, we're not looking at any drinking water issues right now, but as the summer moves on, those things happen sometimes. It's very possible. The other thing that is very helpful here is that it sends a message. It sends a message to our water districts. It sends a message to the citizens of the state that this is an emergency situation, that we all have to be thinking along those lines. I will add to that we've had these conversations with legislative leadership, and both the Speaker and the President are very supportive of this emergency declaration.
So the message is more important than the emergency funds. It sounds to me like
correct.
The emergency funds probably will not be used.
We certainly hope not, but they're there in case we need them.
So the message is more important than whatever mechanics of the emergency order.
Absolutely, yes, that's correct.
Governor, any specifics about what you're discussing with legislative leaders on relief for inflation? Anything more about possibly pausing the state gas tax? Any specifics you can offer?
Yeah, I can tell you. So the discussions around the state gas tax have been met with the same level of concern that I've talked about before. Not because we love the state gas tax, but because of the way that the gas tax is set up. So there are a couple things that are problematic. One is the way way the gas tax funds state government. It goes specifically to the Department of Transportation and to local governments for road issues that have to be taken care of. The other problem is that we actually don't tax directly at the pump. We tax the petroleum companies at the rack, and so any tax relief that comes doesn't automatically get passed on to consumers, or doesn't have to be passed on to consumers. And so there's actually the potential for a windfall to petroleum companies if we cut the tax, because even though technically the consumer is paying that, it's remitted at the rack from the gas companies, and so that's a little different than other states. And so we're looking at other ways. Are there other ways that we can help get relief to the most vulnerable? I will tell you, one of the things that we proposed that I'm very much in favor of, and that I hope the legislature will agree with, is we did a free fare February for transit along the Wasatch Front. We would like to see free fares in every transit district across the state, and the state would fund that for a period of time, 3 months, 6 months, something like that. We know that wouldn't help everyone, but that's a real win-win, because first of all, we saw the numbers in February, and they were very positive. So there's that gives an opportunity for citizens that are struggling, that have access to transit, to be able to use that. That also reduces demand at the pump, which is one of the problems. So if you keep your car parked and get on transit, now you're not buying gas, which will help to lower the cost of gas over time. And then just the environmental piece of this as well, the air quality piece, that the more people ride transit, the less pollution that is coming from cars as we're entering that ozone season in the state. And so that is one area. And there are transit districts. We have transit districts in St. George and Logan and Summit County. So that's one area. I think the cost would be about $3 million a month to be able to do something like that. Again, we would need help from the legislature to appropriate funding for something like that. But that's some of the ideas that are circulating around right now.
Is there a special session coming then, or would we have to wait till the next general session?
We would, if the legislature will agree to do something, and they're meeting to have these conversations. I've only met with legislative leadership. They're going to be meeting with their members to generate some ideas and toss around some of the ideas that we've shared. We would have to call a special session to do something like that, unless there's some funding sitting somewhere that we could use until we get to the general session.
At this point, on the idea of free fare transit, then, some have floated the idea of just the legislature picking up the tab for all transit, free fare forever. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's an idea worth exploring. Certainly, I think we were all pleasantly surprised by the numbers that came out. I would have to look at kind of long term what that looks like, but doing something like this would give us even more data to study. It's one thing to do it for a month, and I'm sure there were a lot of people maybe who've never used transit who said, "Oh, this will be fun. Let's go try it out." But will they keep using it, and will they use it regularly? I think something like this would allow us better data, more data, and help us understand kind of transit patterns so that we can help. And one of the things that we also want to do is make transit more convenient and get it closer to more people. So as more people use the system, that will help us understand. And as you all know, we actually changed the way we fund transit infrastructure this year, in that the state will be taking a bigger role in that, and UDOT will be playing a bigger role in that. So I think for all of us, this would be a great opportunity to learn more and hopefully make some better decisions and maybe some long-term decisions where we could get to that point, Ben.
Governor, back
Jordan,
to the drought now. 2 years in a row now, you've got that state of emergency. What preventative measures are in place so we're not having this conversation a year from now? Because that very well could happen with the extreme weather we've been experiencing.
Well, look, the only way that changes is if we have a good snow year. I mean, that's what drives all of this. And certainly, look, we've had periods of drought in the past. We've had periods of flooding in the past, and I anticipate that we'll have periods of flooding in the future. But right now, the entire West is stuck in this dry cycle, and the only thing that changes that is our ability to utilize the snowpack and increase water storage in the state. So certainly, we will be looking at those things, but the laws that we passed in this session haven't taken effect yet, right? So we'll see over the next year what impact these investments, and they're significant, will have on the state of Utah. But I mean, we're talking $450 million. This was incredible. The legislature was so generous, and there's been what I'm most optimistic about is there has been a real paradigm shift, a mind shift, and it's probably later coming than it should have been. I will admit that. I'll be the first to admit that. But I'm so glad that we got here to where not just legislature and leadership in the state is understanding how water impacts the growth of the state, but how average citizens are also changing behavior, and that's hard to do. But it's happened, and so I'm excited to see over the next few years what kind of an impact these laws that we've passed will have in place. An example of this is the secondary water metering, where we've installed secondary meters. We've seen an immediate reduction in demand, even though we're not charging more. So 20 to 30% in some places reduction in demand just by putting a meter outside so people know, they can see how much water they're using, and it surprises them sometimes. So they don't leave the hose on as long, just things like that. But it's going to take a long time for that to happen. This is basically an 8-year project to get $200 of that $1 million in place. Those are grants that will go out to water districts. So it's not going to happen overnight, but it is a really important paradigm shift.
Governor, back to inflation, how concerned are you about the ongoing inflation nationally and the Fed's plan for further and bigger interest rate hikes?
Yeah, so I'm deeply concerned, and there have just been so many mistakes made at the federal level. I thought there was a really interesting piece yesterday. In fact, it was Senator Romney who wrote the piece in the Wall Street Journal that talked about some of those issues. Now there is one piece that I'll mention that is not directly related to the federal government, and this is a deep concern right now, and that is what is happening in China around supply chains. And sadly, we haven't even started to see the supply chain inflation that is going to come because of the terrible decisions that the Chinese government has made and the lockdowns that they are putting in place right now, and their inability to get people vaccinated with vaccines that work. And so we know that as they're shutting things down now, there's going to be another inflationary bump because of the supply chain interruptions that are happening there. So that deeply concerns me. Unfortunately, and this has been well documented, the Fed's waited too long to raise interest rates, which means they're going to have to be a little more aggressive right now. And let's be very clear, what they're trying to do here, this is very painful. They're trying to destroy demand. I mean, that's what this is. It's artificially destroying demand for homes and other things by raising the cost of capital. And let's also be clear about who that hurts. It hurts people at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. And so while it's necessary, it's very harmful and very damaging. And then the continuous terrible decision making that's happening by this presidential administration around energy and around pumping money into the system. That I met with the chair of the Fed chair in San Francisco last year, and I asked specifically about inflation. And I said, I'm really worried about inflation. You can't keep pumping trillions of dollars. This is economics 101. You can't keep pumping trillions of dollars into the system without it having some impact. And the response I got got was, well, coming out of any pandemic, you're going to have an increase in demand before production can keep up with that. And we think this is going to be temporary. And I pushed back and I said, you're the expert, but I'm really struggling to see this. And now all the experts are admitting that they were wrong. And so, and of course the war in Ukraine is not helping things, but there are things we can do different and better. And I certainly hope that the administration, as Senator Romney called for yesterday, will reevaluate some of the people they have advising them, and will reevaluate some of the policies they have in place that are hurting people.
How devastating was the president's executive order to stop oil and gas leases on federal land? And I know they've come back on that, but just with a sliver of what was potentially available. If the president today said, we're going to open up these auctions again for oil and gas leases, what do you think the impact would be?
Well, I think it would be significant, and here's why. I know there's a lot of people on the other side who are arguing practically that this is a sliver, that this is just a sliver of overall production. But what people fail to understand, who don't operate in the practical world, who have never run a company, who have never run investments, what they don't understand is that messages that come, especially from the top, really determine where capital gets invested. And capital is a coward. It will flee where it's not wanted, and it will go where it's welcomed and wanted. And what this administration has done is sent the message over and over again that energy development and energy production in this country, traditional energy production, is not welcome. And it is not wanted, and that was the message that was sent by prohibiting those leases. And I love to share this with people because it's really surprising. So during the Trump administration, they were doing about 100 leases a year, a little more than 100 leases a year. And so I asked them, "Do you know what the Obama administration was doing?" And it was over 80 leases per year, somewhere in that range, about 80 leases per year. So yes, there was a difference, but it wasn't a significant difference. And then I asked, do you know how many leases the Biden administration has done in the past year and a half? And it's zero. It's zero. Now that is a difference. That's a significant difference. And what that does is it says to producers, and it says to, again, capital, do not invest here. We're not interested in this. And so it's not just the leases. It's what we're saying about energy and energy independence globally at a time, again, when our national security is being threatened, and we knew it was being threatened by a very aggressive Russia. And so I think it was a colossal mistake, and I think we're reaping the whirlwind because of it.
Governor, I want to ask you about Senator Mike Lee's text messages to former Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. The messages showed that Lee initially supported legal challenges of battleground states' 2020 election results, and the text also showed that he was trying to help find a strategy to challenge those results. Senator Lee told the Deseret News that his texts were taken out of context for political reasons. What do you make of his texts?
Well, I appreciate Senator Lee talking about what happened and what he believed and what he texted. I can't speak to his mindset at the time, but I think it's important that he has those conversations. I also want to highlight, what I can speak to is the conversations that I had with Senator Lee. And Senator Lee called me directly. I don't remember exactly what day it is. I think it was January 1st. It would have been right in that time frame. I know it was before my inauguration. So I think it was January 1st that he called me, and he just said, look, I've researched all of these claims. I've looked at everything, and I just don't think there's anything there, and so I'm going to vote to certify the election. And that's what he told me. So I can only speak to what he told me, and kind of lost in all of this is the fact that he did vote to certify the election, which many others did not. And so I appreciated that. But again, I think Senator Lee is the best person to discuss what those texts meant.
Do you think, his actions as portrayed by these texts were good or bad for the state of democracy in this country?
Well, again, I can only say what he said to me, and I've been very clear on my position. I'm an attorney. I ran elections for 8 years. I studied every one of those theories, every one of those allegations of fraud that went through. I looked at all of those as well, and I didn't see anything that would have allowed me to call in question the
cuestionar la legitimidad de la elección. Entonces, yo agradezco que él me haya llamado en ese día, a principios de enero, y que me haya dicho que vio estas cosas, que no vio nada y que él iba a votar para certificar la elección, lo cual él hizo. Entonces, yo no era parte de esos textos, no sé si se tomaron fuera de contexto, pero él es el que puede explicar esto y él lo pidió. ¿Está emitiendo algún apoyo en alguna de estas? No en las votaciones o postulaciones primarias. No apoyo en las... los republicanos, los votantes republicanos van a decidir esto. No he apoyado en ninguna de estas o declarado mi apoyo por ninguna de estas. Gracias por unirse a nosotros para la conferencia de prensa del gobernador en PBS y los vemos el próximo mes. Entonces puede seguir. El gobernador está preocupado en cuanto a cómo el liderazgo puede ver esto en la convención el sábado, cómo es la prohibición de los deportes transgénero. Bueno, no estoy preocupado para nada. Tengo la oportunidad de ir a varios condados, convenciones de condado, y el departamento, he estado en condado de Weber, en todos esos condados, en esos lugares, y estoy agradecido por los delegados, su trabajo duro. Tristemente, y me siento muy mal respecto a esto, no voy a poder asistir a la convención el sábado, no porque no quiero, simplemente lo opuesto. De hecho, tuvimos una misión de intercambio que se ha programado por casi un año, se ha cancelado 3 veces debido a COVID. Y tiene que pasar el 1 de abril y se pasó a esta semana. Entonces salimos para México.
I'm excited for that trade mission. This will be actually my first trade mission as a governor. Usually the governors do 2 or 3 a year, and it's been a year and a half almost, and this will be my first one. So I'm excited about that, but very sad that I won't be able to be there with the delegates. The lieutenant governor will be there. Lieutenant Governor Henderson will be there in our place, and I anticipate that she will be well received as well.
Governor, you joined a multi-state strike force aimed at addressing border security at the U.S.-Mexico frontier this week. What do you believe Utah's role should be in federal immigration policy? And do you plan to follow the Texas government's footsteps in allocating taxpayer funds to address the humanitarian crisis at the border?
So we've been very involved always with our border states in helping to solve some of the biggest crises that we are facing there. Our National Guard was there last year and providing all kinds of support to that operation and that area. We had over 100 members of the National Guard who were there. They are now back home. We will continue to support as asked to do so. Where the support is happening right now is really with the drug trade and logistically. The fentanyl and other drugs that are coming across the border don't stay there. They're pouring into other states, and they're coming into our state. And so our Department of Public Safety works closely with with federal officials on the border, as well as state law enforcement officials on the border, as we share intel and get information back and forth. That's where most of the coordination is happening right now. In fact, when I was back in Washington, D.C. in late January, the National Governors Association, we had an opportunity to meet with the president. I was given the opportunity to ask the president a question, and the specific question I asked him was about what is happening at the border and the concerns that I had and that other governors have. By the way, both on the right and left, about this killer fentanyl that is coming into our states and what we're seeing there. I shared some perspective. I do do think that the border and immigration is actually one area where Republicans and Democrats, a majority of both parties, have significant agreement. I actually think it's one of the easiest problems to solve if politicians would stop being politicians and just solve it. And that is that most Republicans and Democrats agree that border security is important, that we have to stop illegal immigration, we have to do everything we can to stop the drug trade and human trafficking, and also that we should fix legal immigration and make legal immigration easier and make it more transparent for people. That's something the state of Utah tried to do. You asked the question, what role does the state play in federal immigration policy? We passed comprehensive immigration reform that I believe is very popular and could be supported by both parties. I think it's a model to the nation. Sadly, the Obama administration and the Trump administration refused to let us implement that, and so we are where we are. A crisis that has occurred that both parties are taking advantage of, and neither party is solving. And I think it's a mistake. I will add that the president seemed to agree with me, and he said, "Hey, I want to call you and talk to you more about that, some of those ideas." And sadly, I haven't heard from him yet. So,
Governor, why did you agree to sign on to a letter to the S&P about environmental, social, and governance assessments?
Well, I agreed to sign on to it for the reasons that are stated in that letter. It's something I'm very concerned about. I think it's a mistake that we continue to move political issues into every arena of our lives and every arena of our existence. The whole idea of these rating systems are based on finances, which is very black and white. Either you have this much money or you don't have this much money. You have these expenditures, you don't have these expenditures. The S&P and others can tell us state by state, and we have these ratings, and Utah has a great rating in every one of the rating systems, how financially sound the state is, and investors can make determinations based on that. What is happening with ESG and the ESG movement now is that we're incorporating other metrics that are not black and white, and that are very subjective into these ratings, and that it's just an incredibly dangerous road to go down. I think it's wrong. I think it's a mistake, and so that's why I signed on to the letter.
Governor, cannabis users celebrated 420 this week. Can you comment on the rollout of the state's medical marijuana program?
Well, sure. I did not celebrate on 420, nor did I partake, but I will say that I'm very. I think that Utah is doing it the right way. I've had an opportunity to tour one of our cannabis growing sites. A company that is participating with the state in that with medical marijuana. I've been able to see the process from the very beginning to the medicinal products that they produce, and I've been able to talk to patients and doctors who are overwhelmingly satisfied with what we've been able to do. Now, there have been problems with the rollout. There's no question. What I appreciate about the legislature is every session they fix those problems, and as issues rise up, we'll continue to fix those. But I think again we're doing it the right way, and providing relief for those that need it under the care of a doctor, without opening the floodgates in a way that is dangerous, and with some of the problems that come from that we've seen in other states.
At this point, though, the legislature is looking at reevaluating the medical cannabis program. They've created a commission which you signed into law allowing this. What changes do you think that the medical cannabis program needs to have?
Well, I don't know, and that's the reason for the commission, and one of the things I appreciate is that we're constantly evaluating. We could have passed this and just been done with it and said we're not talking about it anymore. That would not have been good for patients. It would have not been good for the state. And so I think this idea that we are constantly reviewing and updating and making sure that we're protecting consumers and also providing the relief to consumers who desperately need that relief, I think that's just good governance. And so that's why I'm supportive of the commission.
Will you be running for re-election? And if so,
I will.
You will. Okay. Do you expect that you'll have a primary challenge?
Oh, I don't know. That's so far away. I hate that we're stuck in these, we're in a cycle right now. I've still got a couple years before I have to worry or think about that. But I've said from the day I announced I was going to run, from the very beginning, that I would only serve 2 terms if the people will have me. That I would not serve more than 2 terms. I stand by that. I've made that promise. I'm not going to go back on it. I would love the opportunity. It's kind of frustrating, I guess I would say, because we tend to focus so much, and I'm not blaming you all as reporters, because I know it's what consumers demand, and you just give the people what they want. But we tend to focus on stuff that maybe doesn't matter as much as we think it does. I have an incredible team of people. I would put my cabinet and my senior leadership and our state employees up against any state or any nation in the world. And together, in partnership with the legislature, we are doing incredible things. There were 513 pieces of legislation that were passed, and some amazing things that would surprise Utahns, would blow their minds, big things that impact their daily lives, impact their friends, their family, their kids, that they never heard about and will probably never hear about. Conversely, there was one bill that I didn't like, everyone knows about that bill, and that got the attention, and it impacted 4 people. And so sometimes we really focus on the divisive and the debates, and we fail to see the good things that are happening all around. The reason I say that, Brian, is that we're trying to change state government in big ways, to make government much more responsive to the people, to make government much more efficient, to make government much more logical. And we're getting there. It takes time. It's like turning a giant ship. It's not easy when you've got 22,000+ employees to move that ship in the right direction. But we're just hitting our stride, and it's going to take us 8 years to get everything accomplished that we promised we would accomplish, but we are well on our way, and I would love the opportunity to finish the job.
Governor, then what impact has Tucker Carlson and Chairman Jorgensen's comments had on you politically, do you think?
Oh, I don't know, nor do I care, to be perfectly honest. I don't do things, and I said this in my letter, like I understand that there will be political repercussions. That's how it works, and that's okay. But I try to do the right thing for the right reasons, regardless of the consequences, and I will continue to do that. I do think that most Utahns admire that, even if they disagree, and I believe that we don't have to agree on 100% of things, but if we agree on 80 or 90%, we're doing very, very well. I mean, my wife and I probably only agree on 80 or 90% of things, and we get along great. And so I do think that most people, even if they disagree, respect that we're not always just pandering, that we're not always just taking a poll and doing whatever the poll says we should do, or watching MSNBC or Fox News and doing whatever they tell us to do that night. That's making us dumber as a society. We can have disagreements, and we can have deep thought, and this is a very difficult issue, and I hope people, I've actually been pleasantly surprised at how many people were willing to read a 4.5-page letter, and I can tell you that with probably 99% of the people I've talked to who disagreed with me initially, who actually read the letter, said, I totally understand where you're coming from, and I support you, or I disagree, but I know why you did what you did, and I'm okay with that. I would also point out that 100% of Republicans in our legislature agreed with me that law was screwed up, and that they had to fix it. And they did. They fixed part of it. They didn't fix all of it, but they fixed part of it. And so that's part of the message that also didn't get out there very much, is that the legislature agreed, like, we made a mess and schools are going to get sued and they're going to go bankrupt. The High School Athletic Association is going to go bankrupt. And so they agreed with me that I was right. And I think most Utahns do as well. So look, if our polling numbers go down a little bit, that's what happens. That's part of governing. If you're just governing to keep your poll numbers up, up, then you're not leading. And so we're going to continue to govern and do the things that we feel are right and best for the people of the state of Utah. And then whatever happens in 2.5 years happens.
I want to get to a couple questions from our remote reporters who couldn't join us for technical reasons. A question from Chris Reed with St. George News. He asks, the drought may come with mandatory actions like watering schedules. Considering the resistance that people and the legislature had toward anything mandatory during the pandemic, do you think there's an appetite for anything mandatory to respond to the drought?
Well, again, I think what's important about the way that we manage drought here in this state is that those decisions are made at the local level, and as those decisions are made, they're generally supported at the local level. Again, these are this. I hate the term mandate. I mean, these are restrictions. They're restrictions for a reason. It's that you won't be able to turn on your tap if we don't manage our water. And the people of Utah know that. We live in a desert. They know. They can see the snowpack. They know those dry months when we didn't get any water. And so the residents have just been great. And if when those restrictions happen, there will be repercussions for people who violate those restrictions. There always have been. If you don't pay your water bill gets turned off. So I'm actually not worried about that. We have some of the best local water managers anywhere in the western United States, and we proved that again last year. I mean, last year was a triumph of the people of Utah, and I can't say that enough. We did not believe we could do half of what they accomplished over those dry months, and they did it. And yeah, there were some complaints here and there, but most of them did it willingly and realized that a yellow lawn isn't the worst thing in the world. And we all survived, and we made it through, and we all have drinks of water and showers that work.
Okay, and I have another question from Sean Hemmersmeyer with The Spectrum. He asks, short-term rentals continue to pose a challenge to Utah's housing market, especially for tourist areas like Washington County. Several bills this past session that would have changed how local government can regulate these rentals didn't get passed. Do you think local governments should be given more power to regulate illegal short-term rentals?
So we will continue to look at that one. The bill came out so late in the session. It was very complicated, very heavy lift. And by the way, I'm grateful we were able to get the bill passed. And I will note that when it comes to some of these inflationary pressures and housing, that bill hasn't been implemented yet. But we are hopeful that we can increase supply here in the state of Utah, start to drive down the price of housing a little bit. As far as short-term rentals go, I will say that is one piece that I am reevaluating, and I've been very supportive of not having any rules at all around short-term rentals. I'm on the record for that, but I am concerned because what I've seen is if you look over the past 10 years, you look at the increase of supply and the increase in population, and they actually should track pretty close. We've had a lot of new homes built, a lot of new rentals, new apartments, and so again, economics would tell you that the price of housing should not be increasing at the rate it is now increasing, because we have the supply rising here, demand rising here. They should be offsetting each other. But one of the things that is happening is many of that pieces of that supply and the new supply and old supply are being converted from housing stock into short-term rental stock, and so we're using our houses as hotels, which means that even though the supply of houses are increasing, the supply of housing is not increasing at the rate. I think we have 20,000 maybe plus, something like that, short-term rentals, and so it's certainly given me pause to kind of think, okay, is there a rational structure that we can put around this? Not to eliminate short-term rentals. Short-term rentals are good. I rent Airbnbs often. I think it's important. It's important for our tourist economy. It's important for the citizens of the state of Utah. It's important for property rights, right? And I'm a property rights guy. That's why I've really pushed back on this in the past, is letting people do everything they want with their property. But there does come a point when the price of housing is just so explosive, and our kids and grandkids can't live here anymore, that I think that we're going to have to reevaluate and reimagine what that looks like. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet. What I'm saying to answer the question is that I'm open to that conversation, where I probably wasn't open to it 3 or 4 years ago. Please.
On that note, the affordable housing note, Senator Mike Lee is sponsoring a bill to open up federal land in the West for more housing. This is something environmental advocates say will harm public lands and contribute to urban sprawl. So what do you make of this proposal?
Well, I support the proposal. I think it's exactly what we need. Again, it's supply. We need to increase supply. I think we can do it in smart ways that don't harm the environment. We can do it in ways that require density in the right areas. And I want to say, I think we have to be very careful about how we categorize that proposal. He's not talking about putting housing developments in the middle of national parks or wildland areas. What he's talking about is federal lands that are abut and in some cases are inside of cities that exist now, and being able to use those in ways that make sense. It's just categorically unfair that Western states, so much of Western states, are owned by the federal government, where they don't have to worry about that in these other states and these other issues. And it's always fascinating to me how people who don't understand these lands, who don't spend time out here, are the ones making the decisions about how these lands are utilized. And so I don't think it's an either-or proposition. I think it's a false choice. I think we can utilize some of those lands in very smart ways, environmentally safe ways that just make sense, and that the average person would look at that and say, this is a no-brainer. And so I support Senator Lee. Yeah.
Governor,
Katie?
how is the state's COVID response going?
I would say we still talk to our epidemiologists, our public health leaders in the state. We talk about what we're seeing across the country and across the world, and what we're seeing here internally. So as you know, we're in this steady state now. We were the first or second state to move in this direction. Many other states are following now, and we're relying on our our health care system, including public health, to treat this pandemic the way we treat other diseases. And we're still monitoring. We're using wastewater, and we've enhanced the wastewater monitoring system. We are working with our healthcare industry throughout the state. We look at people who are going to the emergency room. Every day we get reports on that. How many people are going with COVID-like symptoms? They're being tested. We can tell if it's the flu, RSV, COVID, something else. And we're seeing small increases in some places, decreases in others, nothing that worries them. And when we talk about the BA2 variant, the subvariant of Omicron, that we've seen some increases in the eastern states, that now appears to be coming down in those states as well, they're not very concerned about that at all. With our vaccination rates as high as they are, the natural immunity that has been conveyed in both the Omicron and the Delta surges, and the measures we have in place, we will probably see a small surge, but nothing that's of concern to them.
What besides free fares are you proposing to bring down inflation?
Well, so there's not much we can do in the state of Utah to bring down inflation, right? It's increased supply, and again, the federal government controls so much of that. The problem with inflation is that it is it is driven so much by the federal government and federal policies, and so that's beyond our control. So, but we are trying to influence that, trying to again increase supply, get as much supply as we can into the system. But the question that I've posed to the legislature is, how do we help the people that are being hurt the most by inflation? Those are the people I'm most worried about. So that, and this is where you have to be careful, because do you put more money into the into the pipeline, into the system, which could increase inflation? But if you do it carefully, so looking at things like I proposed a refundable food tax credit last year. We decided not to go down that route, which I appreciate, and in fact I think we did something that is even better, something that I supported with the tax cuts that we were able to get through. But can we look at that, the lowest socioeconomic scale, and is there something we can do to help them out? Whether it's giving them some sort of rebate relief to help them with the gas, with the gas tax. Can we help people who are on government assistance, increasing that assistance during this time, because it's not just the gas pump, right? It's food as well. So I'm thinking of mothers who are trying to buy formula for their babies. We know who those people are. Can we get more funding into some of those programs to help them temporarily until prices start to come back down? Those are the types of conversations that we're having.
So would that be checks, for instance, a la California, where $800 checks went out in some cases for, as reportedly, went out for gas relief because of the high cost of gas? Are you looking at direct payments to certain individuals?
So we've discussed direct payments. I don't know that that's going to go anywhere. That's one of the options that we've talked about, again, but to a very small group of people. The other thing that we've tossed around is looking at car registrations, for example. If people are paying more at the gas tank, where else are they paying that interact with government? So could we give some people relief on their car registration this year? That's another idea that's popped up. So that's what we're talking about. Where does government intersect? Where does state government intersect with the people who are being hurt the most? And is there a way to provide some relief there? Are there fees in government that we could waive as opposed to direct payments that would help people that are suffering right now?
All that's on the table.
All that's on the table. Yeah, those are the conversations we're having.
Yeah. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Okay, I'll go. I wanted to follow up with you on Brian's question about oil and gas leasing. It sounds like you would support expanding that, but the science is very clear that burning fossil fuels exacerbates climate change. On the other hand, we're talking about addressing our drought, which is a symptom of climate change. So how can you support both of these efforts, opening up oil and gas leasing while also trying to address our drought?
Because people dying of hunger right now because they can't afford a loaf of bread at the store is much more important to me, and our national security is much more important to me in the short term right now. This is, again, I'm so tired of these false choices that we keep being presented with, that you think what you're arguing right now is if we don't extend any leases this year, the drought's going to end. Do you believe that?
No.
Okay, neither do I. Neither do I. And in fact, if we did everything that has ever been proposed by every environmentalist in this state right now, it would have absolutely zero impact on global emissions. Because right now, China and India every year are 3 timesing any savings, any reductions we are doing in the United States right now. So my decision isn't between saving the world and incredible inflation. My decision right now is let's do the smart thing right now while we are also innovating our way out of this crisis, which is what we are going to do. If anyone out there, let me be very clear, if there is one person in this world who believes that we are going to regulate our way out of climate change, they're fooling themselves. We will never do that, and we have never done that as a country. We have never done that as a world. Anytime we have had a crisis, we have innovated our way out of that crisis. And that's what we're doing. We are putting more energy, pun not intended, into the innovation sector. Yes, we need to be increasing our wind production. We need to be increasing our solar production. We need to be increasing our geothermal production. And let me be even more clear right now, and that is we have to start looking at nuclear energy again. If you really care about climate change, if you really care about emissions, then you should be the first person advocating for nuclear energy. Clean, safe nuclear energy. This is not the stuff we're talking about 50 years ago, 60 years ago. The technology that is available now to produce energy without those emissions, without carbon emissions, is immense, and we're sticking our head in the sand by and large. So that's what I'm talking about right now. Not a foolish policy that is performative, that will make people feel better and get elected because they're pretending to solve climate change while all they're doing is making it harder for regular people here. That's how you lose the battle. If you really care about climate change, let's be investing in nuclear energy. Let's be investing in these areas that will help over the long run. And so I just fundamentally reject these false choices that because we're going to increase production and some leases while the Ukraine is being destroyed by an evil mastermind who is using, by the way, sorry, I get a little passionate about this, but we're cutting back. We're cutting back our oil production and our fossil fuel production. And by the way, that's doing nothing to decrease demand. That does nothing to decrease demand. So what happens? Who fills that gap? It gets filled in two places. It gets filled by Russia, by a madman who's a murderer. And by the way, a group who has no environmental restrictions whatsoever in the way that they produce their oil. Governor Burgum in North Dakota tells a story about these engineers from Russia who come to look at their pipelines here in the United States. And they ask the question, how much oil do you lose before it comes out of the end of the pipeline? How much comes in at the beginning and how much comes in at the end? And the Americans said, what are you talking about? They said, well, no, how much do you put in and how much comes out? They said, well, the same amount we put in comes out at the other end. And they just laughed because in Russia that doesn't happen. It gets stolen, it leaks out on the ground, it's an environmental disaster. And yet what we are saying to the world is we would rather you get your oil from that place than us so that we can feel better about doing nothing. That's exactly what we're talking about. Same thing, Saudi Arabia, that's the other place where this happens. They don't care about human rights. They're not protecting the environment. Right? We do it better here than ever. We can produce these things as demand changes. We can do it here in a way that gives us security, in a way that helps the citizens of this country to have lower prices and to have jobs. And we can protect the environment here better than anywhere else. It makes no sense to me that we've tricked ourselves into believing that we're saving the world when all we're doing is making the environment worse and we're hurting our citizens. And that's exactly what is happening.
Governor, to change gears on here, I just am reading over this letter from the Treasury. It has your name on it. I'm sure you're familiar with it, the S&P Global Ratings letter. What do you make of that and why reject the ESG indicators?
Well, as I mentioned in the question before, I think it's just a mistake when we start bringing these concerns into a rating system. The person who gets to make that rating system has all of the power because they're subjective. They're not objective. Dollars and cents are objective. These standards, whatever they are subjective. And that's not the role that the S&P and others should be playing. And it's only going to hurt consumers. It's going to hurt citizens. And we think it's a huge mistake.
You think more specifically here in Utah than other areas?
No, everywhere. I mean, that letter was not just based here on Utah. I mean, we already know what the ratings are, and we're going to be just like every other state. It's not the rating itself. It's just that the rating exists, and that this is becoming much more commonplace. That we, instead of having these arguments as we should on the political battlefield, we should be having these arguments about the environment. We should be having those arguments here. But instead, we're going to try to weaponize these rating issues to get our way. That's dangerous. I just think it's a huge mistake, and we would encourage the S&P and every other rating agency out there not to go down that path.
Governor, on Ukraine, your thoughts on President Biden's move to streamline refugees by granting humanitarian parole to anyone sponsored by an NGO or a family member. How many refugees should Utah expect?
As many as we can get. We'll continue to work with the administration. Obviously, there are some limits to what we can do, but the people of Utah have shown over and over and over again how much they care about refugees wherever they come from, whether it be Afghanistan or Ukraine. The stuff we're seeing right now, I mean, It's almost indescribable out of Maripol and some others, and it's vicious, it's evil, and if we can bring some light into the world, we should do that. And so we're prepared, and I believe Utahns are prepared to do whatever they can to bring in as many as we can get.
Any idea of when you might welcome Ukrainian refugees to the state?
We don't know yet. No. Again, that's all based on the federal government and the changes that they're trying to make and to get people over here. We know with Afghanistan it happened very, very quickly. A little different circumstance in that the surrounding countries are taking in these refugees, and so Poland and Romania and others. So they at least temporarily have a place to stay, and so we'll just work with them as they vet and go through the background checks and get them out here, but we haven't been given a specific date.
Okay, we are out of time. Thank you for taking another full hour with us and answering our questions. We appreciate you being here.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. And thanks for letting me fire it up, Emily. I appreciate it.